Good. Hi guys. Welcome to learning how to create an animated GIF in Photoshop. If you've done this before, this is just going to seem very simple. So it's just a little more practice in how to create an animation, a basic web animation in Photoshop. So we're not using any fancy animating programs. We're not using any fancy scripting languages. This is just some of the basic frame-by-frame animation that Photoshop can do. So all your files that you're going to need are on the Blackboard site. So if you want to go ahead and download, there's the pumpkin clip art, the Starbucks logo, the leaves background, and then the handout that I'm going to follow along for this tutorial is right here. That's that step-by-step how to break this down and do it. So what the final piece is going to look like is this. So you'll see I love pumpkin spice lattes, perfect for fall. Whether or not you do is totally up to you. So to get started here, I'm going to open up Photoshop. I've got my 3 files open. I've got my little tiny background here. I've got my pumpkin. I've got my Starbucks logo. Those are the pieces and parts we're going to deal with in animation. So I need to create a new document that is going to house everything for our animation. So I'm just going to go to File, New here. It's going to open up my dialog. I can set this to Web. So, and because I want it to work in an RGB color mode, you can see right there, RGB color mode. Everything's set into pixel dimensions, and I'm going to have you guys set this to 450 pixels wide by 750 pixels high, keeping the resolution at 72 pixels per inch. RGB color space. Great, let's hit create. So there we've got our artboard. So the next step that I'm going to work in is I'm going to reset my workspace. To reset your workspace, it might be this tiny little guy up in the corner. You also have it under Window Workspace is another place to grab it. And we're going to just reset that to motion. So that's already set in motion for me. When I set it into motion, let's reset this here. Oh, not painting. Motion. Oh, let me reopen my, by default that should open up your timeline. I think I've got mine closed here. That's going to open up this timeline. If it doesn't open up for you, I was doing a different animation project and I think I closed it. You want this little timeline that's going to dock here at the bottom of your palettes. We're not going to use it in the start of this demo, so I'm just going to fly mine down. But that's what we're going to work with is this timeline frame by frame animation. So I'm just going to hide mine here for a second so you can see my, it's a little big there. You can actually see what I'm working on. It just makes it giant. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to grab that leaves background. So I'm going to do a select all, Command A, Command C, which is copy, or edit, copy. Jump back over into my document and do an edit paste, Command V or Control V, depending on if you're on a PC or Mac. And there's my background. Looks great. So I want to adjust this to be the full size of my artboard here. So I'm going to do an edit transform, and I'm going to actually just do a free transform. So Command T, because I want to rotate it and scale it. So I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. If I hold down Shift while I rotate, it's not going to give me, a normal rotation is going to give you all these different degrees. If you hold down Shift, it's going to lock your rotation. You can see it there, locking to perfect geometric, 135, 120, 90. So it's easier to get 90 if you hold down Shift while you're doing it. And then to scale it, I'm going to hold down the Alt key and the Shift key. And that's going to scale from the center versus if I did it just holding down Shift, you can only pull from the corners. Always holding down Shift to get a proportional scale. So I'm going to hold down Alt and Shift. Great. Once I've got that size the way I want it to, I can just hit the return key, or I can hit the check mark to accept that change. That looks fantastic. I realize it's pixelated. Doesn't really matter for this. Okay, so now I'm going to grab my type tool and I'm going to type out the word I. I'm going to make it a really cool dark brown. So let's find a nice dark brown here. Doesn't really matter for this demo, whatever you feel like using to turn it on yours. And you can pick out a cool font. You can find a cool Halloween font. Use a stencil font for this demo. It's different than the one I turned into or have posted. Let's make it 100. That's too big. Make it like 80 points big. Great. So there's my eye. And then grab my layers palette here and pull it over so you can see it a little better, just so you can see it in closer proximity. I'm going to type each word on a separate layer. That's important for the animation, so my next word is love. I want love to be on its own layer. I love. And I'm going to type out pumpkin. And then the word spice. And then the word lattes. Great, that all looks good. So you can see I have I and love and pumpkin and spice and lattes all on their own layers. So that's really important because I want to animate each of these pieces separately. So if I just did one large text box and typed it all out, I can only edit that as a single piece. So having these on separate layers allows me to edit them individually and do separate animation effects on each. So if you've got it typed out and you say, well, that's not really aligned properly, you can just hold down Shift, select all the layers, and your align palette will show up along the top here. So then I can just use that align palette to align center and distribute centers. So now that's nice and aligned for me. That looks great. All right, so the next thing I need to do is I'm going to grab my pumpkin. So I'm going to flip over to my pumpkin guy. There he is. So I'm going to do a select all, edit, copy, Command C, and do a Command V, Control V, edit, paste right in there. That pumpkin is gigantic, so I'm going to scale it down. So I'm just going to do a free transform, edit, grab it here, free transform, and I'm going to hold down Alt and Shift to scale from the center, move it, scale it down. That looks great. Place it right under here. Looks good. I can either just hit the return key or the check mark to accept that change. Now you notice this has a white background on it, and I don't really want that. I want it to look really transparent. So rather than kind of knocking myself out trying to get rid of all the little pieces of white, I'm just going to, within my layers palette, I have my blending modes here. I'm just going to change the blending mode to multiply. Multiply takes the white out of any given image and kind of multiplies it over that background. That looks perfect. Fantastic. Okay, last little piece that we are going to do is copy over the Starbucks logo. So I'm going to jump over to that file again, Command or Control A to select all or under select all, Command or Control C to copy, jump over, Command or Control V to paste, and then Command T for free transform, scaling it on down to the size that I want it to be. I'm going to place it right there in the corner, either hit return to accept or the check mark to accept the change, and there's my logo placed. One thing I want to do is name my layers. I've got layer 2 is the pumpkin, layer 3 is the logo. It's so helpful to always name your layers. It's just good practice, so I'm going to call this pumpkin graphics, so it's not the same as the word pumpkin. And then layer 3 I'm going to rename, double click to highlight that text and rename it Starbucks logo. It's just good practice to always make sure that you're naming your layers. I can even name layer 1 leaves background. It makes it easier to edit if you ever go back into your own projects to edit. So there we go. I've got all my artwork set up, ready to go. Now I'm going to get in, the next thing I'm going to do is set up my guides so I know where to move these letters and words, or the words to, and then start my animation. Okay, so now that I've got my artwork set, let's draw some guides. So what the guides are going to do is they're not going to publish. I'm just going to click on that top ruler and I'm going to draw a guide down to where I like to have one at the baseline of all my words because I'm going to slide them in and it's helpful for me to know where they are. So just clicking and dragging down from this ruler up here. If your rulers don't automatically show up, you're like, where do I get my rulers from? It's under View Rulers right there, Command R. So that's how you get your rulers to appear. So I know in my animation that I want the word I to slide down. So this guide here is going to tell me where to stop that. I'm going to slide the word love in from the left side. So I'm going to slide it here. So I want to have a guide drawn out so I know where to stop the word from animating. Because if I don't have a guide out, once I start moving it in, I could end up getting a little wiggle wiggle, or it might end up not being lined up. So having these guides is just going to really help me. I know I want to slide the word pumpkin in from the right, so it's going to slide over here. So I'm going to draw a guide out to the left of the word pumpkin. So that's where that, oops, put it in the wrong spot. Put it right there. So that's where the P is going to stop. So when I slide it in, I know it stops there. One more for the E on spice, because I'm going to slide that one in from the left side too. So it's going to go I down, love in, pumpkin in the other way, spice in the other way, and I'm going to slide lattes up from the bottom. So I'm going to drag a guide out for lattes so I know where to stop that. These guides do not publish when you animate out your GIF. However, it's just helpful to get it all set up so you know where things are going to go. All right, great. Guides are set up. Now I need to physically move the words off of the artboard so that I can get them later. Sometimes this causes problems with the newer artboard versions of Photoshop, so I'll show you the workaround if it comes to that. So I'm going to hold down Shift and drag my eye up, and it did. It popped it into a new artboard for me. You see how all of a sudden that popped it up where I've got artboard 1 and now something off the artboard. I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to click on this little button that just kind of locks it to that artboard. So it's not going to create a new artboard when it goes off. Let's do love. And again, I'm going to click that artboard tool to make sure it's locked to this artboard and won't create its own artboards. I'm going to hold down Shift and just slide it off. Holding down Shift will keep it right on that line. Let's grab pumpkin, make sure it's staying on the artboard. Holding down Shift, I have my move tool selected. I'm just going to slide it off this way. Spice, click that artboard, slide it off there, and lattes, clicking the artboard, sliding it down, holding down Shift the whole time. That way it doesn't wiggle waggle, otherwise you end up getting kind of a wiggle in your animation. Always hold down Shift when you're moving these. I'm going to select my pumpkin graphic and set the opacity to 0. Starbucks logo is also setting the opacity to 0. So now I've got everything ready, everything's turned off, so when my animation starts, it starts with this blank canvas and the words and fly in, the pumpkin and the logo both appear. So this is where we start the animation. We're all set up. You always want to do, whenever you're doing animation, get everything set up and also know what the motions you are going to do before you do them. Animation's really tricky to kind of do on the fly. That's why animators storyboard, because they need to know what they're going to do before they start doing it. Otherwise, they're going to end up redoing a lot. So now is where the timeline comes into play. So I'm going to open up my timeline. If you don't know where yours at, it's under Window, Timeline. and we are going to create a frame animation. There's two options here, so you might be defaulted to create video timeline. That's not what we're going to create in this particular project. Click the drop down and select create frame animation. That doesn't do anything, it's just a selection from the drop down. Once you've got create frame animation, you actually want to click that button. There we go, and you see those options changed. Now it has turned into my timeline, and I can see in frame 1 in this little thumbnail there's nothing there. It's an exact snapshot of what we see right now. So I need to click on the button. There's a lot of little options down on the bottom. Those are a lot of your timeline options. I'm going to click on the button that looks like a little post-it note being peeled back. That is the create new frame. It's a duplicate frame button. So you see that created frame 2, which is an exact duplicate of frame 1. So with frame 2 selected, I'm going to grab my eye. So I'm just going to hold down, I know my eye's up there, I'm going to just hold down shift and arrow my eye down. Holding down shift moves the value of 10. Just going to nudge my eye into the proper place, and then I'm going to go back to frame 1, and you can see that that's jumping. That's how you know you're getting the correct animation. If you see eye on both of the first frame and the second frame, it's populated both frames. So jumping back to frame 1, I'm going to click this tween animation. That's looks like a little button with a bunch of squares there. So I'm going to hit tween, and I've got the option of tween with next frame. There's other ones as last frame, but obviously we want to tween between 1 and 2. Tweens stand for the between frames of your keyframes in your animation. I'm going to just add 4 frames. All layers is fine. I'm going to leave all these parameters selected. We're only concerned about position, but it doesn't hurt to have all those checked. And I'm going to click OK. Now I can test, so you see that put 4 frames in between frame 1 and now frame 6. So if I hit play, I can see that that's sliding my eye in place. Looks great. It's a little chunky here. It will smooth out when you actually animate it, but there's my first frames. So now my next step is to move the word love in. So I'm going to be selected on frame 6. That's the last one, eyes in place. I'm going to click that duplicate frame button again. That's going to create an exact snapshot duplicate of frame 6, but we're going to work on frame 7. So I'm going to move up to the word love, and I'm just going to nudge that on in, holding down shift and arrow till it gets to its spot. Great. I'm going to tween it. Now you can add more frames if you'd like to. The more frames you have, the slower your animation is going to go. The less frames, it's going to go faster. So it may not be as smooth with too few frames. It may be really dull if you have too many. So it's, you know, you can mess around with this too. When I'm reviewing these projects, I'm not so much concerned about exactly how many frames you have. Play around with it and get a feel for how many frames is appropriate. So maybe we'll do 5 here and just kind of see how that goes. I'm going to click OK. And now I can test out that animation. It goes a little fast because that's a bigger move, but I love, there we go. That looks good so far. We'll do the next one. I'm going to select, making sure I'm selected on that last frame, frame 12 for me. I'm going to duplicate that last frame. I'm going to move up to pumpkin. You can just see this is a little bit plug and chug. I know pumpkin's coming in from this side, so I'm just going to hold down shift and move it over. That looks great. Select frame 12, hit my tween frame. Maybe I'm going to add 6 frames because it's a pretty big word, just to kind of keep it a fairly smooth. That was a little chunky. You see it kind of changes a little bit as you go. Great, looks good. Gonna make sure I'm selected on my last frame, duplicate that frame, working on the very last one, select the word spice, holding down shift and my arrow key to nudge it over. A little far. There we go. Clicking back on the previous frame, tweening it. Let's do 5 frames. Great. Play. Looks fantastic. All right. Almost back to something exciting. So selecting on, got this last frame here, 25. I need to duplicate that frame. Grab my word lattes. That's sliding in from the bottom. This is where it kind of, you can see that it helps to have a plan before you start animating. I'm going to slide the word lattes up from the bottom just because you can see how quickly this would get messy if you have a lot of things going on and you didn't have a plan. Jumping back to the previous frame, going to tween that out. Looks good. And it's always helpful to test your animation as you're going, as you make it, as you're going, working along, testing it to make sure everything's looking the way you want it to. Nothing's appearing, disappearing. All right, so now that I've got all my type animating, sliding in, out, I want to make that pumpkin appear at the bottom. So I'm going to duplicate layer again, and I'm going to select on my pumpkin graphic, and I'm just going to change the opacity from 0 to 100. So then when I tween, you remember we had all these parameters just still selected because we weren't doing anything with them. Opacity is one of those. So you can change opacity effects. If you ever want to make like stars twinkle, you just change their opacity between frames. We got a lot of them doing that. It looks like stars twinkling. So we'll bring, you can see those frames populated. I can see, there we go, it pulls up. I'm going to duplicate my layer again, or duplicate from that last frame, jump up to my Starbucks logo, and turn the opacity up to 100. I'm going to tween those frames. Maybe I'll have that go a little slower, so I add maybe 7 frames. Again, the more frames you have, the longer that animation effect is going to take. Fewer frames, it's going to go faster, but it may be a little chunkier. So we'll add 7 frames there to make that Starbucks logo appear kind of slowly. Testing that. There we go, that looks great. So now I can play through my whole animation from frame 1 to frame, I ended up with 45 frames. Cool. So that looks great so far. Tested it out, looks good. Now comes the final step in working on your animated GIF, is getting it ready for output. One little finishing detail is I'm going to want my animation to loop. I'm going to set it to loop 3 times. There's these options at the bottom of your timeline bar. By default, it may say once. This is its looping options. It has once, 3 times, forever, or other. You can set it to loop 2 times, 5 times, 27 times. Generally, those are the default. 3 times or forever. So if you want it to loop forever and ever, amen, you can set that. So it's like a constant blinking graphic. I'm going to set mine to 3 times that it's going to play before it'll shut off. So this animation will loop 3 times and then it will stop on that final frame. So because I'm going to have it loop, I want this whole piece of art to kind of stick before it loops again. So if you've noticed at the bottom of your frame maybe that it says 0 seconds, you can actually adjust the delay between frames. So if you want a frame to stick for half a second, 0.2 seconds, by default it's just set at 0 to 10 seconds. If you want it, if you're just doing kind of a clip show, where you're doing a clip of a photo to a clip of a photo, you could set them all to just 10 seconds and they'll kind of slide through. There's other options. I'm just going to select on my very last frame, frame 45 here, and I'm just going to set that to a 2-second delay before it loops. So this last frame is going to stick for 2 seconds and then the animation is going to play again. So that's another way you can play with the timing of your animations. A lot of web animations, they're not always that many frames. They just may have a couple words that stick and then flash to the next, and then loop. So they don't always have to be all that complicated. So this is great. I've got all this saved. The first thing I want to do is save my working Photoshop file. That is the most important thing you can do. Why? Because if you don't save a working Photoshop document for yourself, but you save the GIF, Photoshop will let you close, or you could force your way out of Photoshop if it says, hey, wait, you didn't save this. You don't have a working file anymore. So if you wanted to change your animation, you don't have this awesome layered Photoshop file, you can't get back in and make any adjustments. So number one thing to do is save that PSD document for myself. So I'm going to go to File, Save. I'm just going to name this pumpkin spice animation. If you're turning this in, there you go, sorry, name it. And I want to make sure it's set to a Photoshop document, so a .psd. You need that .psd. That's a layered Photoshop document. So I'm going to save that, check maximize compatibility, so I can always come back 1 day, 2 days, 5 years from now and work on this animation if I need to. So always save a working document for yourself somewhere. So now that I've got my working document saved, now comes the fun of I need to export this for web. I actually need to make the GIF itself. So I'm going to go to File, Export, and I'm going to go to Save for Web. And this brings up my Save for Web dialog box. The first thing I need to do, it may default to a JPEG. It depends on your Photoshop. I know mine has a lot of my presets. I want to save it as a GIF. That's important. Generally, we don't save a lot of web assets as GIFs, save for web animations like this. GIFs only remember 256 colors. That is a maximum number of colors a GIF will remember. That's why you never want to save a photo as a GIF. So I want to just keep it at 256 colors. That looks great. I want to come down, my animation options are here. So you want to double check and see that those are still there. So I see my looping options. It says other 3. If I wanted to, I could change it there. If I, just kidding, change my mind, I could change it there too, as in addition to that timeline. That's another place that you can set that option if you forgot. So I see it's got 45 frames. That's something I want to make sure all my frames are there. And I can test my animation in this window, so I can actually test it and play it and see that it's playing okay. It's another place to double check that your animation is working correctly. So that all looks good. I'm going to hit that save button. And so it's going to say, okay, what do you want to save it as? Pumpkin spice animation.gif. Perfect. I'm going to hit save. It's going to work for a second. Then if I jump out to my desktop, to ignore the fact that my desktop's really messy, I'm an artist, it's what I do, I can see my pumpkin spice animation.gif. Now, how do I test it? Well, I can just drag it into the web browser of my choice. So I just drag it into Firefox, open it with Firefox. There it goes, it's playing. And I can test, I can see that that sticks for 2 seconds at the end. And then, so plays again. Sticks. Beautiful. That looks great. So there you have it. Easy, quick and easy way to make an animated GIF within Photoshop. So have fun making your web ads for your company. And until next time, have a good one.